Brentwood, Los Angeles. A winter afternoon that seemed deceptively peaceful. A neighborhood of tree-lined streets and multi-million-dollar mansions, long accustomed to absolute privacy. Yet within just a few short hours, this affluent enclave became the epicenter of one of the most shocking family tragedies in modern Hollywood history. Inside the home, tied to decades of memories, creativity, and success, Rob Reiner, the director behind The Princess Bride and When Harry Met Sally, and the woman who had been his partner for more than 3 decades, were found dead. Not an accident, not a stroke, but a brutal homicide, confirmed by law enforcement authorities themselves. The news spread at lightning speed. Hollywood fell silent. The public was left reeling, but the greatest shock was still to come. Just hours later, police arrested their biological son on charges of murdering his own parents. A familiar name within the family, now thrust to the center of a grave criminal investigation, facing charges that could result in life imprisonment without parole or even the death penalty. How could a family once seen as a symbol of success, intellect, and unity collapse in such a horrific way? What truly happened inside that house, beyond the glow of Hollywood lights and laughter-filled parties? This is not merely the story of a crime. It is a tragedy of blood ties, of silent fractures that widened over many years, and of the moment when every final boundary was shattered. And to understand the truth behind this catastrophe, we must turn back the clock, returning to the time before the fateful night, to where the warning signs had already appeared. Signs no one imagined would lead to such a devastating end. Before the tragedy unfolded, the Reiner family was an image Hollywood and the public believed to be immune to collapse. Rob Reiner was one of the figures who helped shape modern American cinema. His films spoke of love, friendship, and empathy. Deeply human values, grounded in real life. By his side was Michele Singer Reiner, a private yet steadfast partner who stood with him through more than 3 decades of marriage in a Hollywood world famously fragile. The house in Brentwood was more than an address. It was memory itself. Family dinners after film premieres, long conversations into the night, years spent raising children under the glow of fame. From the outside, it appeared to be a solid home, wealthy, successful, respected. But fame does not grant immunity from pressure, and success does not guarantee peace. The Reiner family had 3 children, all of whom grew up in the long shadow of a famous father. To the public, they were celebrity kids. Inside the home, however, there were invisible expectations, quiet comparisons, and a constant sense of needing to prove oneself. These pressures were not loud, not explosive in front of outsiders. They accumulated slowly, silently. Those who later spoke about the family said that alongside love and sincere efforts to support one another, there had also been long-standing concerns, not because of neglect, but because of too much concern, to the point where the boundary between helping and enduring became blurred. When a family tries to keep everything okay for too long, cracks often form in the places least visible. On the night before the tragedy, everything still appeared completely normal. Yet it was precisely then that the first signs of a family catastrophe began to surface, though no one was alert enough to recognize them. And just a few hours later, that sense of normalcy collapsed entirely. Smoldering tensions stepped into the light, setting in motion an irreversible chain of events, leading straight to the night of horror in Brentwood. The night before everything collapsed, there were no sirens, no police. No one was thinking of the word tragedy. It was a Christmas party, warm, crowded, and unmistakably Hollywood, hosted at the home of Conan O'Brien. Decorative lights glowed, Laughter filled the air, and lively conversations flowed among familiar faces from the entertainment world. For most guests, it was simply another end-of-year social gathering, no different from countless others. The Reiner family was there as well. But according to later reports from American media sources, the atmosphere around them that night was not entirely normal. While Rob and Michele tried to maintain their customary composure, Nick, their youngest son, was described as exhibiting behavior that drew attention, interrupting others, speaking erratically, and struggling to control his emotions during private conversations. One source stated that a tense argument took place between Nick and his parents right there at the party. Not the kind of loud confrontation that makes an entire room turn to look, but words heavy enough for those nearby to sense that something was not right. Rob, according to accounts, candidly expressed his concern about his son's mental state to a few acquaintances. This detail matters. It is not evidence of a crime, but it is a warning sign. No one present that evening could have known that. Just hours later, that Christmas party would be referenced in headlines as the final night before the tragedy. At the time, it felt like nothing more than an awkward moment. A family trying to manage private struggles in a public setting. Rob and Michele left the party earlier than usual. There was no announcement, no drama, just a husband and wife returning to their familiar home in Brentwood, the place they believed was still their safest refuge. No one knows exactly what was said behind closed doors that night. No one heard the final conversations. No one imagined that the tensions suppressed beneath the party lights would not fade when the night ended. Because just a few hours later, before dawn had even broken, every boundary was shattered. And from that moment on, that harmless Christmas party was no longer a year-end memory. It became the unavoidable starting point of a family tragedy that forced all of Hollywood to look back at what had been overlooked right before its eyes. That afternoon, Brentwood was as quiet as ever. No screams, no signs of chaos. Only a silence that lingered far longer than it should have. According to a prearranged appointment, a massage therapist arrived at the Reiners' home. But no one answered the door. There was no response to phone calls, no reply to messages. That silence, in a family known for punctuality and carefulness, began to feel suspicious. The call was passed on. And then, Romy Reiner received the news. Romy did not arrive expecting to face disaster. She carried only a vague sense of unease, the kind of feeling everyone has felt at some point and usually reassures themselves is nothing more than overthinking. The Brentwood house was where she'd grown up, a place associated with safety and family. There was no reason to imagine the worst. Until the door opened. Inside, everything was unnervingly quiet. No familiar sounds. No movement. And then Romy saw her father, motionless on the floor. The signs of violence were so clear they needed no explanation. Blood had soaked into the wooden floor. The air inside the house seemed to freeze. Just seconds later, an unavoidable truth emerged. Michele Singer Reiner was also dead, inside the very kitchen where she had once prepared family meals. In that moment, time seemed to stop. Romy called 911. Her voice trembled, yet she struggled to remain composed enough to say the words no one ever wants to utter. "My parents are not breathing." It was not a call of uncontrolled panic. It was the final survival reflex of a daughter trying to do the right thing in the worst moment of her life. When law enforcement arrived and confirmed it was a homicide, Romy's body could no longer hold itself upright. Those present later recalled that she collapsed at the scene, as if all strength had left her at once, along with the last fragile thread of hope. police sealed off the property. Ambulances stood outside a house that had once symbolized absolute privacy. And from that moment on, the Reiner family tragedy was no longer a private matter. What stood out most was what Romy kept repeating in her shock, according to witnesses. It was not the question, "What happened?" but a name, a single name spoken amid the chaos before any official accusation had been announced. At the same time, elsewhere in the city, the remaining member of the Reiner family was not at the house. And as the sun slowly set over Brentwood that evening, a question began to haunt investigators, and soon the public as well. Where was Romy when the tragedy occurred? And who had been inside that house throughout the night? The answer would not come immediately. But from the moment of this discovery, the first pieces of the truth had already begun to fall into place. Slowly, coldly, and irreversibly. Once the house in Brentwood was sealed off, the rhythm of the story shifted immediately. There was no longer room for speculation or emotion. From this moment on, everything would be guided by what could be verified. Investigators from the Los Angeles Police Department entered the scene in silence, documenting even the smallest details. There were no signs of forced entry. The security system showed no evidence of an external break-in. This did not immediately prove anything, but it significantly narrowed the possibilities. Whoever committed the act did not need to overcome physical barriers to enter the house. Either it was someone familiar with the space or someone who had legitimate access. Alongside the scene analysis, forensic evidence began to speak in its coldest language. Documents from the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner confirmed that the cause of death for both victims was multiple sharp force injuries, and the case was officially classified as a homicide. No graphic description was necessary. Those two words alone, multiple wounds, were enough to indicate that the violence did not occur in an instant. It unfolded over time with sequence and intensity. From these findings, a timeline slowly took shape. The estimated time of death fell between midnight and the early hours before dawn. And it was here that surveillance footage from outside the crime scene became a crucial piece of the puzzle. Around 4 a.m., a camera in Santa Monica captured a man checking into a hotel. Staff later recalled that he barely spoke, showed no visible panic, and did not appear rushed, an emotional detachment difficult to interpret, yet striking enough to be carefully noted. Later that same day, another camera at a gas station recorded the same man purchasing a drink. Every action appeared normal, almost unnervingly normal, given what had happened just miles away. For investigators, these recordings were not meant to explain psychology. They served a single purpose: to establish movement, who was where, at what time, and during which hours they were absent from the Brentwood house. At approximately 9:15 p.m., with the coordination of the U.S. Marshals Service, police carried out the arrest of the suspect. There was no chase, no resistance, no explanation offered at the scene. Everything unfolded quickly and quietly, as if the loudest part of the story had ended long before. Layer by layer, crime scene, forensic findings, surveillance footage, movement records, the evidence was placed side by side. No single detail was enough to reach a conclusion on its own, but taken together, they formed a logical sequence that was difficult to ignore. The name Romy had spoken in her initial shock was no longer the instinct of a desperate daughter. It had become the focal point of a rigorous criminal investigation. And yet, one vast gap remained. An investigation can determine who was where, when, and how. But the most important question, why, does not exist in camera footage or on a living room floor. It lies in the past, in tangled relationships, and in inner struggles that had quietly accumulated over many years, long before everything crossed the point of no return. To understand why the investigation converged on a single name, we need to step away from the crime scene and look directly at the person at the center of this storm, not through rumors, but through what has been documented over many years. Nick Reiner was not a stranger within the Reiner family. Born into a household steeped in fame, Nick grew up surrounded by film premieres, conversations about art and politics, and the unspoken expectation that he, too, would do something with his life. But Nick's path did not follow the trajectory his family or the public had once imagined. According to American media reports, Nick struggled with long-term substance addiction, marked by repeated cycles of rehabilitation and relapse. The family was described as having made multiple efforts to help, treatment programs, supervision, and attempts to keep him close, not out of control, but out of concern. In his parents' eyes, Nick was not a troubled child, but someone gradually losing the ability to regulate himself. People familiar with the family later said that Nick displayed two very different states. At times, he was quiet, almost withdrawn. At other moments, he became volatile, unpredictable, and quick to anger. These rapid shifts left those around him unsure of what might happen next. Notably, according to accounts, these behaviors did not appear only during periods of substance use. They sometimes persisted, even during phases believed to be sober. In recent years, Nick had moved back into the family home in Brentwood. On the surface, it appeared to be an attempt at repair, parents nearby to offer support, a son with a safe place to stay. But beneath that arrangement lay simmering pressure. Living together was not only about care, it also meant friction, constantly tested boundaries, and the fear that things could spiral out of control at any moment. The night before the tragedy, at the Christmas party, those tensions surfaced publicly for the first time. Harsh words, behavior that drew attention. None of it was enough on its own to prove anything. But when placed against the backdrop of years of addiction and psychological instability, these moments became warning signs, ones that, in hindsight, many wish had been recognized more clearly. After his arrest, Nick appeared in court subdued and silent. There were no public justifications, no emotional outbursts. To the public, that silence was easy to interpret in many ways. Legally, however, it meant only one thing. The answers would be found in the case file, not on his face. It is crucial to emphasize this point. At this stage of the story, Nick Reiner is an obvined defendant, not a convicted individual. What is known about him, addiction, instability, family conflict, is not proof of a specific act, but placed within the context of what happened in Brentwood, it explains why the investigation could not separate this individual from the tragedy. Because sometimes a crime does not begin with a single moment of violence, but with a long chain of missed warnings. And to fully understand the Reiner family tragedy, Nick must be seen not only as the suspect of one night, but as the product of years of tension between love, fear, and helplessness. Forces that quietly accumulated until every final boundary was ultimately shattered. Once the case moved beyond the walls of the Brentwood home and into the courtroom, the Reiner family tragedy was no longer a private matter. It instantly became a public event, one where the law, the media, and public opinion all converged at the same time. The first court appearance of Nick Reiner was brief, almost clinical. There were no lengthy statements, no heated exchanges, only procedural steps, confirmation of identity, the charges, and the next court dates. Yet that very brevity made the room feel heavier, because what was read aloud was anything but routine. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office announced that Nick was being charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, with special circumstances, including multiple victims, and the direct use of a deadly weapon. The potential penalties were stated plainly without euphemism: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole or even the death penalty, though at this stage, prosecutors had not yet declared their final intent. Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman emphasized to the press that this was an exceptionally serious case, one that demanded the full weight of the highest legal mechanisms available. His words were measured, not inflammatory, but they left no doubt. The system regarded this as among the gravest accusations California criminal law can bring. On the other side, defense attorney Alan Jackson addressed the media with a consistent message, urging the public to withhold judgment and allow the judicial process to function as designed. He stressed that the case involved extremely complex and serious issues, and that rushing to conclusions served neither justice nor the victim's family. While lawyers spoke in the language of the law, the media outside the courthouse operated on an entirely different rhythm. Cameras, long lenses, and stark headlines crowded the scene. A family once widely admired was now pulled into a storm of scrutiny, where every detail, from the defendant's facial expressions to each word spoken by counsel, was dissected without mercy. Nick is currently being held at Los Angeles County Jail, having waived his right to a speedy trial. That decision signals something significant. The legal battle ahead will not be brief. The defense requires time to review evidence, assess mental health factors, and prepare arguments that could directly affect the determination of intent, the pivotal element in first-degree murder cases. To the public, terms like first-degree murder, special circumstances, or life without parole may sound like cold legal phrases. But for the Reiner family, each of those words represents a permanently fractured future. On one side, those who are gone forever. On the other, a son facing the possibility of never being free again. The next court date has been set for January 7, 2026, a date that may seem distant, yet close enough to stretch tension across every waiting day. For the legal system, it is simply another step in due process. For the public, it is a charged pause, where the question is no longer who did it, but what will the system do with the person accused? Because from this moment on, the Reiner family tragedy has entered a different phase. No longer investigation, no longer speculation, but a prolonged confrontation between legal truth, the weight of punishment, and how a society chooses to define justice in cases that make everyone recoil. After the legal statements, the bold headlines, and the cold court schedules, there exists another reality, one far less visible. The Reiner family is unraveling in silence. For Romy Reiner, the shock did not end at the moment the tragedy was discovered. It continued, hour by hour, day by day, through hospital stays, a flood of phone calls, and the nameless guilt carried by a surviving child. Romy all but disappeared from public life, appearing only once to make a simple yet heavy plea. Please allow her family privacy. There were no accusations, no controversial statements, only a deeply human request to grieve in peace. Her brother, Jake Reiner, also chose silence. Together, the siblings released a joint statement saying that no words could capture the pain they were enduring. Their parents were not merely names revered by Hollywood, they were best friends, the emotional anchors of the entire family. At the same time, the tragedy carried another layer of anguish. The person accused of causing it was also a blood relative. This reality blurred every emotional boundary. How does one mourn parents while confronting the fact that a sibling, a son of the same family, is being held on the most serious charges imaginable. There is no script that prepares anyone for that. Outside the family, waves of condolences from Hollywood flooded social media. Tributes, memories tied to classic films, and warm behind-the-scenes stories poured in. For the public, it was a way to honor a legend. For the family, each mention was both comfort and a fresh wound, a reminder that there were no parents left to return to. Meanwhile, the pressure from the media did not subside. Cameras, lenses, and repeated questions surrounded a family struggling simply to stay upright. That attention, however well-intended it claimed to be, exposed private grief to millions of watching eyes. In crisis, the Reiner family was forced to make some of the coldest decisions of their lives, protecting a legacy, working with attorneys, keeping distance from public discourse. Not because they wished to control the narrative, but because it was the only way not to be completely swept away. Amid all of this lies a bitter paradox. This was a family known through stories of love, empathy, and human connection. Now they must learn how to survive a reality where kinship and catastrophe collide head-on, with no elegant lines of dialogue to soften the blow. And when the media lights dim, when the court proceedings remain unresolved, what is left in that house, and in the hearts of those who remain, is emptiness. A void that cannot be filled by justice, nor eased by time. It can only be carried day by day as a permanent part of their lives. At this point in the story, the most important task is not to deliver a final explanation, but to look directly at the factors that may have contributed to pushing this tragedy to the edge, calmly, cautiously, and without going beyond what the facts allow. There is no single cause powerful enough to explain why a family could collapse in such a devastating way. Instead, what American media sources and legal records suggest is a convergence of overlapping factors, many of which existed long before the fateful night. First is the issue of long-term mental health struggles and substance addiction. According to publicly released information, Nick Reiner had a history of battling substance abuse, marked by periods of treatment followed by relapse. In many families, this alone is already a heavy burden. In a high-profile family where every detail is scrutinized, that pressure becomes even more intense. Addiction does not automatically lead to violence, but over time, it erodes self-control, judgment, and emotional boundaries. Next is the accumulation of family conflict. Sources indicate that the relationship between Nick and his parents was not constantly volatile, but it was persistently fragile. Repeated attempts to help, ongoing efforts to rescue, and hopes renewed again and again, when prolonged without resolution, can turn into a sense of entrapment on both sides. Parents remain fearful, yet unable to let go. The child feels controlled, yet dependent. It is a dangerous cycle. Environmental factors and the pressure of fame cannot be ignored. Growing up in the shadow of a Hollywood icon, Nick faced not only family expectations but also invisible societal ones. Every mistake risked being magnified. Every failure could be interpreted as proof of being unworthy. For someone already unstable, that pressure can act as a catalyst, intensifying internal conflicts. Finally, there is the triggering moment, something that has yet to be clearly identified. An argument, a final remark, or simply an accumulation that exceeded the limit of endurance. In many family-related cases, there is no single explosive moment. There is only a point at which all mechanisms of self-restraint collapse at once. What must be emphasized is this: these factors are not a defense, nor are they a conclusion of guilt or innocence. They merely help explain why investigators and attorneys alike describe this as a complex case, one where the boundaries between pathology, personal responsibility, and legal consequence are tightly intertwined. The Reiner family tragedy, therefore, cannot be understood by examining one night alone. It is the result of many years in which tension, fear, love, and helplessness coexisted. And for that reason, any conclusion reached too early, whether by the media or the public, risks oversimplifying a tragedy that is anything but simple. The remainder of this story will no longer belong to speculation or analysis, but to memory. How society remembers what was lost, what went wrong, and what, if anything, can still be learned from a tragedy that forced everyone to pause. When the layers of investigation have temporarily closed, when the courtroom falls silent and the headlines begin to fade, what remains after this tragedy is not a legal file, but an irreversible loss. To the world, Rob Reiner was a cinematic icon. To his family, he was a father, a husband, a living, breathing human being, taken away in circumstances no one could have imagined. Michele Singer Reiner was the same. Not merely the wife of a famous director, but the quiet pillar of a family. Someone who spent her life holding everything together. This tragedy has no winners, no satisfying ending. Only people left behind, forced to live on with a void no sentence can ever fill. If there is one truth this story compels us to confront, it is an uncomfortable one. The greatest tragedies often do not come from strangers, but from the closest relationships. They do not erupt in a single moment, but are shaped by years of missed warnings, by rescue attempts that fall short, and by the fragile boundary between love and helplessness. The larger questions that remain are not only for the court, but for all of us. Have we taken mental health seriously enough? Are we placing unbearable expectations on people who are already fragile? And what, if anything, can society do to prevent similar tragedies from unfolding in silence? We may never fully know what happened inside that Brentwood house on that night. But choosing not to rush to judgment, not to turn real pain into spectacle, and not to forget that behind every headline are real human beings, this is the minimum that this tragedy demands. And what about you? What do you see behind this story? A criminal case, a family tragedy, or a warning about what we too often overlook? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay with us for the stories to come. Goodbye, and see you again.